Good evening, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Triple Threat Comics YouTube channel. I'm your host, Ian Miller. Tonight, I am joined by fellow Shadow fans. Please welcome Steve Donoso and Sam Oatley. Guys, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ian. Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
So, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourselves and what exactly your group does?
The Shadowed Circle is the only publication devoted to the character of the Shadow. There hasn't been a publication about him for over 2 decades. And we began back in the pandemic. I was reading the Shadow and realized that other characters like Doc Savage had lots of, over the years, had lots of different publications, but the Shadow never had a fan publication ever, really. That was, well, maybe one, but not many. So I thought, well, why not start one? And I was home during the pandemic. It was kind of, I had cabin fever, and it was a good creative outlet. And then got joined by Sam and Tim King, Steve Novak, John Sees, the Shadowed Circle team, which puts together, we do this journal. It's about 70 pages. It's 7 by 10,
Wow.
color covers, black and white interior. You want to get an idea
Wow.
of the interior. And so we do these, and subscriptions are for 3 issues, not 3 issues a year, but 3 issues, however long it takes us to get to 3 issues.
Yeah.
So right now we put out number 8, and we're going to be working on issue 9, but we're also working on the Shadowed Circle, well, the second Shadowed Circle Compendium. So a couple of years ago, we did the first Shadowed Circle Compendium, and we had Michael Uslan do the introduction. Michael's produced every Batman movie since Batman Begins. And we have Will Murray, who's worked both in comics and pulp history. Will's done a lot for us and contributes articles and introductions. In the new compendium, we are having David Avallone, who's a great comic book writer. And we'll be looking at his Shadow, the Twilight Zone, the Shadow 4-issue piece that he did some years ago, which is a great series.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember that series vividly because I've been a Shadow fan for a number of years and collect all most of the comics. That was one that really stuck out to me because it seemed like a great pairing, the Twilight Zone, the Shadow. So yeah, I'm definitely interested to hear about that in this book. So it sounds like you've had this on your mind for quite a while, but it really took the pandemic when you really had nothing to do to really go to it.
Actually, it came out during the pandemic because I got back to reading The Shadow. I read The Shadow, sometime in the mid-2000s, and I enjoyed it, but it didn't grab me for some reason at that moment. But during the pandemic, it did grab me. And so it just emerged then. And the difference between the journal and the compendiums is that the compendium is a combination of the best of the journal plus brand new articles. It's also totally in color, which is different than the journal, which is the interior is in black and white. Yeah. And with the second compendium, the first compendium, we had about 6 brand new articles and then maybe a dozen to 15 older articles. With the second compendium, at least 50% of it's going to be brand new, never published before. So that's fun. And in each of them, we had a group article. So in the first one, we had an article, what 6 Shadow stories from the comics, the pulps, the radio series, movies, what 6 Shadow stories would you bring to a desert island? And we had all kinds of people, Will Murray, Michael Uslan, lots of contributors saying which ones they would bring. For this second compendium, we're doing what 7 Shadow stories would you choose for a Shadow TV series, and why.
Oh.
And so that's another group article that's going to open it, and that'll be fun. Sam, do you want to introduce yourself and say something?
Yeah.
I'm Sam Oatley. I kind of an interesting story how I got involved in the Shadowed Circle. I was not involved in the first issue. That was mainly with Steve Donoso and John Sees. John Sees did a lot with Steve on that. And I was actually, it was one of those things somebody had told me. Someone said, oh, yeah, there's this new journal dedicated to the Shadow talking about his history. And I got it. And the first time I read it was actually up in a hotel in Michigan. I was traveling around a bit. And I just had this, like, this first issue just as, like, you know, little reading material to do while it's raining outside. And I read it. I'm like, oh, wow, this journal's really going in depth into a lot of elements of the Shadow. I remember the first issue had one that was like listing all the instances that zombies appeared in the Shadow's stories and his pulp and his radio episodes. So I was like, wow, this is going real in depth. And just at the bottom of like the second to last page, there was a notice saying, hey, we need a layout editor and a web manager. Well, I didn't know much about layouts. So I couldn't apply to that. But I was like, well, I was born I was born after the 1980s. I know a lot of internet stuff. So I said, well, let me try it out and see if I can be a help. And Steve hasn't gotten rid of me in the last
You've
4
definitely
years.
been a huge help, Sam. You've been a huge. And the second issue on was much easier because of you and Steve and Tim. The first issue, we had a group of four of us, but 2 dropped out for personal reasons just as we were getting going on the first, just as we were kind of compiling the first issue. And so it was just 2 of us doing it, which was crazy. But we got it out. We had an interview with James Patterson, which was interesting. I got to talk to James.
Wow.
Don't like his Shadow that much, but I like him, and I like what he does for readers. He's very committed to readers, book readers. Yeah. And some other interesting stuff. And we're always looking to everyone out there. We're always looking for submissions. So if you're either if you want to write something or draw something and send it in to us, we'd love to see it. Get a hold of us with an idea if you want. You know, if you're going to write something, get a hold of us ahead of time and say, hey, I've got this idea. I'd like to write about this. And we'll work with you and it'll happen.
Yeah, I remember my early conversations with Tim too, when we were talking about you guys having another show. I actually gave him one of my illustrations of the Shadow I did back in 2022. And, you know, just as a thank you.
I remember that, yes. And I told Tim, oh, tell him, yeah, we'll use this. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks.
Of course.
And so we have writers and artists who contribute, and international ones. We have people from the UK. We've got Marcin Nowatzki, who's in Romania, who does lots of our interior illustrations at times. Also have a fellow in Brazil. And his name is now escaping me. His last name is Penteado. Arthur Penteado. Thank you, Sam. Who writes great articles, and he contributes. So it's great to have an international group and to see that the Shadow interest in the Shadow isn't just limited to the U.S. There's people in Australia, people in the UK, Belgium, Canada, of course.
Yeah. What do you guys think is the lasting staying power of the Shadow? Why has he, why have fans been fascinated about him after all these years?
That's a great question. I mean, in some ways, I think, at least from the beginning, from the pulps, Walter Gibson had a good writing background. He was a journalist. He'd interviewed presidents of the United States before, and he just had a way of creating mystery and magic in the Shadow stories, and I think that grabbed people. And then it moved on to the comics, to radio. Sam, what do you think?
Well, I think a lot of it is Walter Gibson's writing, but I think Will Murray was talking about in one of his Shadow history books, but he said that Gibson really found a way to sort of distill this idea of like the shadowy figure who was for a long time associated with evil. Like if you saw a person of a drawn down hat and a dark cloak, you're like, oh, that's like a spy or that's a bad guy. But Gibson basically decided to take sort of that villainous archetype and sort of twist it around into this force for good. And it was basically this whole idea of the kind of person you wouldn't expect to be the hero, this like scheming, plotting guy who has a bunch of agents. You like most people would have looked at that and said, oh, that's the villain. That has to be the villain. That's the stuff villains do. But Gibson turned it on its head. He said, no, this is the hero. This is the man who is actually fighting against all the bad guys. He's simply using the bad guys' methods. And in some ways, he's more effective in that sense because he understands the criminal mindset. So I think that's a big part of his staying power, just Gibson focusing on that idea of taking one preconception we have about characters and sort of flipping it on its head.
Mm-hmm. That reminds me of Tim King's article in the upcoming compendium, which is about the Shadow and espionage and counter-espionage, and how actual methods, espionage methods, are in the stories. How the Shadow actually uses actual espionage and counter-espionage methods.
Yeah. Yeah, over the years, the origin story has kind of changed, with whichever writer is, currently writing him and all that. In some instances, obviously with Gibson, he didn't go too much into the origin story, so they had to kind of make it up as they went along. But in recent years, we always had, that the idea of him in his regular form, the Kent Allard identity. He was in World War One, so he's had background in these type of situations, And of course, we've had, where he's been he gave into his evil, inner, demons at that point. So it's always changed.
Mm. Okay,
Yeah,
Gibson finally fleshed it out. It took a while. It went from the magazine started in 31, the pulp magazine, and in 37 is when Kent Allard arrived via Gibson. So it took 6 years.
Yeah. Yeah, then you had the radio series that started, a couple years after that. And then he kind of, just changed the Ken Allard identity to the Limelight Cranston one just to make sure that matched up with the radio series.
Yep.
But it's always fascinating to me just how the character's always been written or portrayed, because it doesn't steer too far away from what Gibson originally wrote. So I was always pleased that they stuck to, the source material as much as they could in that sense.
Yes. And another person who really helped bring the Shadow back in the 1970s has a piece in the second Shadow compendium, which is Michael Kaluta.
Yeah.
So he's got a written piece, and his art is the back cover as well. So that's we're excited to have him involved.
Yeah, he does phenomenal shadow artwork. I'm just mesmerized by this guy's talent where he comes up with these covers. I'm like, wow. Yeah, it's actually funny we were talking about Michael Uslan earlier because I actually had him on not too long ago on the show. Yeah, very nice guy, lovely guy. And he was talking about writing his first shadow comic for DC Comics. And I actually found that issue. I'm like, this was a great issue. He really hit something there. He got to the character because he was also a fan of the character as well.
Yeah.
So I was like, wow. But it just goes to show you that the fandom does not die. And therefore the shadow does not die.
And the Shadow and Batman, who Michael Uslan is very connected to, the Shadow and Batman are very connected historically.
Yeah. Actually, I think it's commented in a couple of the Shadow and Batman comics, just how much one has influenced the other.
Yes.
But this is great, guys. Getting an entire collection of articles in here and also some scripts just to, show newer fans, that the show's been around for a long time. And if you read this, guys, you'll get to know more about his history.
Yes. Yes, and people write interesting articles. There was an article about how a Shadow radio program had a lot of similarities to a Sherlock Holmes story by Arthur Conan Doyle. And so that was interesting because Holmes was certainly one of the influences when Gibson created the Shadow.
Yeah.
We had an amazing 3-part article that was written in the early 70s but never published. It got mailed to me about how the Shadow might have funded his organization. And that was pretty interesting. The guy goes into detail about how he could have funded it, which he actually did well. It was fun to read and to take a look at kind of the Shadow as a real world possibility. And then we've had an article by like a mid-late 20s guy saying, 20-something relationship with the Shadow. And so a lot of variance, a lot of diversity.
Well, yeah, because I think they gave the opportunity to really think about what the fans thought about how the character, did what he did for a number of years. And it's always fascinating when you hear stuff like that because, like you said, very well thought out and some of it very plausible.
Yes. And it's interesting you mentioned Kent Allard because we're planning issue 9 to be a Kent Allard issue. And that's our next issue is issue 9 of the journal. And we're planning on that being a Kent Allard issue. So at least half the articles, if not more, will be about Kent Allard in that issue. So that'll be fun to read as well, see people's different perspectives. And I learn a lot just from the contributors. And Sam, you have an interesting article coming out as well in the second compendium.
Yeah. My article is focused on talking about the comparing the Shadow with Robert E. Howard's character Solomon Kane. I actually have his collection of his stories I've been reading last couple months, and because Solomon Kane actually premiered a little under 3 years before the Shadow did. And out of curiosity, I was kind of reading Solomon Kane going, there's kind of a few interesting parallels with the Shadow and Solomon Kane. And so I started sort of digging sort of to see what was there any sort of influence Kane might have had on the Shadow? Was there any sort of connection between Gibson and Howard? It was a very interesting research journey. So any Howard fans will probably want to check that out, because it's just sort of interesting seeing how Robert E. Howard and Walter B. Gibson were writing from very different experiences and mindsets, but they actually created characters who were kind of not exactly the same, but they had a lot of interesting parallels. So,
Well, it could always be unintentional. At first, one person thinks, "Oh, this is a great idea," then another, said, "Oh, this is another great idea." Then eventually, when you find out that, when you read this person's stuff, you're like, you know what? I guess we had the same thought here, or similar thoughts.
Right. Yeah.
yeah. Well, Will Murray talked about how there had actually been characters in Pulp Fiction called the Shadow several years before the Shadow came around. I think one was called like the Shadow over Wall Street, or something along those lines, and it was kind of like it was similar. Gibson said he'd never read that story, and the thing is, I can believe that, because it's, like I said, Gibson was taking this very well-known cliche of the slouch hat, the black-hatted sinister figure, and it was kind of like, yeah, that was just a common idea at the time. So there are a lot of instances of characters who are weirdly similar, but the closer you look into it, yeah, they all kind of came from different places.
I have an article. I have an article in the book on a film called Judex, French film from '63, I think it is 1963. That's very shadow-like, and they even went ahead and they hired, for the main actor, they hired, even though it was a French film, they hired an American magician. Talk about
Really?
a Walter Gibson experience. They hired an American magician to play this character, and so not only is he dressed in a black cape of a black slouch hat, but he performs magic at times. Great film.
Yeah, I had to check this out because I like the sound of it, and it makes sense. It really makes sense. Okay, so I do have to ask this question for both of you. Any favorite version of the Shadow, where it's from the books or the radio show, whatnot? What's your opinions on that?
Favorite versions of the Shadow? I've got lots of them. I mean, from the comics, there's the Shadow 1941, Hitler's Astrologer.
Oh,
That's
nice.
great. That's a great, that hardcover volume that they came out with. It's a great story. And then there's a lot of favorite Shadow novels. Some of the early ones, which are different than the later ones, but Eyes of the Shadow, this is the second story, really grabbed me when I read it. And we've got a fellow, John Olson, who writes about Shadow Radio, and sometimes he writes about lost episodes, and those are fascinating. And he'll retell an episode, so he'll actually retell it. And so those are great to hear, because the lost episodes don't have audio tapes. You can't listen to them. There are scripts available at times, but not audio tapes. Sam?
Yeah. And I guess for my favorite iterations of the Shadow, in regards to Pulps, I think Walter B. Gibson writes him the best. I actually think that probably my favorite Shadow story was the second story with the Voodoo Master. I believe it's called City of Doom.
Ooh.
And it's actually very unlike a lot of Gibson tales, because it's very breakneck. It's very fast. And the Shadow's by himself. He's fighting the Voodoo Master's bad guys all by himself. He doesn't have any other agents because he knows they might be susceptible to
Yeah.
the Voodoo Masters thing. And it's just him just blazing through this small industrial town and fighting his way through. And it's one of my favorite stories because it just shows because it's so anti-Gibson. Gibson was usually a lot more slower with his stories, but when he decides to break out, do the breakneck stories, he actually does a really great job, and that's a very fun one. In regards to radio, this might be controversial with some Shadow fans, but I actually prefer Bill Johnstone's iteration of the Shadow. I think he's okay as Lamont Cranston, but I actually prefer his Shadow to Orson Welles because I think Bill Johnstone does a better job at the menace of the Shadow.
Yeah, I always found him a bit terrifying, especially with his laugh. I'm like, this is perfect because the Shadow should be terrifying to criminals.
Yeah.
But yeah, he did the menacing voice very well. And yeah, he was a little killer like Cranston. I mean, he wasn't as youthful sounding as Orson Welles had been.
Yeah.
But Orson did not have that scary laugh.
Yeah. And I guess my since we were talking about comic books a second ago, my favorite comic book iteration of the Shadow is the 1973 DC version by Denny O'Neil, and
nice.
Because I just think that one caught his vibe very well, and some of because Denny O'Neil, Michael Uslan, they did a very good job with that series in a way I don't think a lot of other writers have matched. So
you may have a point there. Yeah, I think so.
And I should have said before that this book that we're doing, that our Kickstarter campaign is for, the second Shadowed Circle Compendium. The subtitle is celebrating 95 years of the Shadow, because this year is the 95th anniversary of the Shadow.
It's fantastic. Well, since we actually have the link down below, why don't we show them the Kickstarter?
Sure.
You gotta love this, folks. I mean, yeah, you gotta be blown away by this. Wow. 8 days ago, 168 backers, and you got $15,490.
And we just broke our second stretch goal. So our first stretch goal, we added 10 more pages to the book. With our second stretch goal that we just hit, we're adding another 20 pages. So that's a total of 30 new pages that we're adding to the book. It's now going to be a little over 200 pages.
Wow. Fantastic.
And there's great limited edition add-ons in the Kickstarter. There's a book we're doing called Shadowed Sketches. And that book is only available during the Kickstarter. It's not going to be available on Amazon. It's not going to be available on our website. It's only going to be available during the Kickstarter. And then we have a set of 8, like it's 3.5 by 5 3/4 inch holographic cards, which are gorgeous by different artists. We've been doing holographic cards for the last couple of campaigns we've done, and this set is a set of 8. If you go further down, you'll see it. It's great. But if you go to the Kickstarter, we have the articles that we're including. You can just get a sense of that.
Nice. Man, this is such great ideas, great articles. Obviously, he's the creative team.
Joe Booth did the cover that we saw up above. He's one of our main artists.
Amazing. Okay, so this is now the obviously the current budget and the stretch goals.
Yep, and we hit both of those amazingly enough.
Yeah. Sure did.
And then we get into the reward levels, which start low and go all the way up.
I really love the covers. I really do. It just
Joe Booth has been doing these incredible covers. He's one of our 2 staff artists, but he's done covers for issues 5, 6, 7, and 8 now, plus the hardcover first compendium, and now he's doing the hardcover second compendium. And Marcin Nowatzki's doing the softcover compendium, and that was his illustration at the very beginning.
wow. It really is very reminiscent of the pulp covers, which is obviously the idea here.
Yeah.
And speaking of the pulp covers, the highest tier we have here is one that actually one of our artists will paint whoever purchases the tier into a shadow-esque painting that is going to be reminiscent of some of the old shadow pulp covers. So
Wow.
that's a very exciting tier.
Not only is there a shadow in that oil painting, but there's your likeness as a character.
Yeah.
And Joe paints incredibly well. And so you'll see the couple of those paintings.
Wow.
Coming right up.
Wow.
Yeah. So the question mark is on the face because it'll be your face. And that's the angel agent level. And there's only 4.
Want to collect that?
Only 4 of those are available.
Oh my.
And then you get a lot of other stuff as well with that level. So we have a coin. We'll get into that. We'll see that in a second. Once we get into the add-ons, it'll show those right there. Yep. So that's the cover of Shadowed Sketches, which is the book that will only be available during the campaign, and it's a lot of incredible shadow illustrations, new shadow illustrations. And then under that, you've got the 8 holographic card set.
Wow. That's amazing.
And if you want to know what the holographic cards are actually like, there's a video right under that of somebody reviewing them and looking at them. We have a 95th anniversary coin that John Sees has illustrated.
Wow.
And designed. We have a flicker pin, which is, I don't know if you've ever seen those. Sometimes they're on rings, but they're lenticular.
yeah.
So you have an image, but if you move it slightly, you get a different image. So we have a pin that does that. We have a 3-print set by Marcin Nowatzki, which is he does great art. So it's 11 by 14 prints.
Nice.
And those add-ons are only going to be available during the Kickstarter. So, if you're interested, please check us out.
Yeah. I think clearly fans are very interested. And yeah, 8 days to go. I think I think you get a few more backers to come in and just buy some of this incredible stuff, especially these add-ons. And yeah, the painting I think is a fantastic idea because that would be great for any collector right there.
Yes.
Yeah, but this is a book you don't want to miss out on, folks. I mean, for God's sakes, you've got literally the best of the best in this book right here. Articles from various, people that have been clearly fans about it. Very well thought out articles and amazing artwork. What more do you want?
And we
Yeah,
have fun
just
putting it
fantastic.
together. It's a lot of work, but we have fun putting it together. And to give you an idea of what the inside of the first compendium looked like. So again, as opposed to our journal, which is beautiful, but it's in black and white, this is in full color.
Wow.
So the pages.
Wow.
And Steve Novak, who does the design, does the layout, does a beautiful job on the graphic design and layout. We're very lucky to have a great team.
Yeah. And clearly as passionate as you guys are, just to create with this incredible volumes. I mean, come on.
And we feel like we're keeping the shadow, in front of people, which is good, because there are times when the last 95 years, there's been times when he's been very visible, times when he's been sort of visible, times when he's been less visible. And the last big visibility was the 3 James Patterson novels, which were different. Patterson didn't respect the old Shadow as much. In fact, the first novel, he kind of pretty much cut him down.
Yeah. I read that first book.
Yeah, that's
I
the one.
I was happy, but I was also disappointed at the same time because I'm like, don't get me wrong, I love James Patterson, I love his writing, but I was like, this is not quite up to par with what Gibson and company came up with all those years ago, and I just felt it just took away a bit much.
Yeah.
But again, you're trying to appeal to a younger audience. You're trying to reintroduce the character that has been on the public mind, except for maybe the comics, for the last maybe 25 years.
Yep.
Yeah. I think I reread that first Patterson book. I think he was kind of trying to go for like the Marvel Cinematic Universe sort of audience, because there was a lot of sort of strange. When I was rereading it not too long ago, I was like, there's a lot of stuff here that I remember seeing in like some of the Marvel movies, like Doctor Strange or
he had fireballs coming out of his hands at some point.
Yeah.
He was morphing into animals at one point. Shape shifting.
Yeah. So,
yeah.
But I think that sort of speaks to how different creators sort of do the Shadow sort of based on their respective time, because even if you go back to even the 60s when Archie Comics tried to do the Shadow story, they dressed them up in goofy spandex because it was the 60s. Campy superheroes were all the rage. And it was kind of like every decade people will do different things with him, sort of based on the whims and the cultural milieu that they're living in. And that's why Denny O'Neil did the darker version of the Shadow in the 70s, because that was when the real gritty sort of streetwise crime dramas were really starting to take off in the 70s. You had tons of cop shows that were showing the mean streets, So it was kind of like, yeah, it kind of it just sort of he's really a reflection of his age, I think. Whether he's in the 30s or if they bring him to the future, it's kind of like all these different creators at different times sort of look at him a slightly different way.
Yeah.
Kind of similar to Batman. Everybody does a different thing with Batman every couple of years.
Yeah, they focus on most likely one aspect of the character, whereas others will, focus on another aspect. I think the only few people that really, pretty much honored what Gibson had done, as well as the other creators that came before, even with Danny O'Neill, was Matt Wagner when he did Year One, as well as even the rest of that run and eventually the Death of Margot Lane storyline. I was like, this is probably as close as we can get to the Gibson Shadow as we can. Obviously, he's got other influences as well, but I'm like, this is pretty close.
Maybe we should get Matt Wagner at some point. That'd be interesting.
Yeah. I think you should. I think you should because he's got a lot of stories to tell. I had him on when he was doing Dracula for his Kickstarter. With Kelly Jones. In fact, I have to have him again in October because they're doing their 4th volume, I believe. But that's beside the point. Yeah, but he told me a little bit about his idea of the Shadow. So I would definitely contact him and give him the right article because I'm pretty sure he's got some thoughts about it. So yeah,
yeah.
I think as you get as much people that actually worked on any of the series in the comic series, I think you'll get more people invested in the journal.
Yeah, which is why we're having David Avallone. I mean, that's just a great. When I first heard about the Twilight Zone, the Shadow, I thought, whoa, that's quite a combination. How are they doing? Actually, Sam introduced me to it because Sam had it on a list of his. And I said, oh, well, I love Rod Serling and I love The Shadow. So let's see what this is like. And he did a great job. Very introspective story about identity and who am I?
And I believe you, Steve D, have an article in the compendium actually talking about when Walter Gibson wrote some Twilight Zone stories in one of the Rod Serling paperbacks that he did for the Twilight.
He did 2 books, yeah, 2 books where he had adaptations of maybe anywhere between 3, 4, and 5 Serling stories per book, and then the rest of the stories in the book were all his that he just originally wrote.
That's fascinating because,
go ahead.
No, it's fascinating because I never heard about this. So, yeah, I'd definitely be interested.
And it was interesting to see him adapt Serling stories. He added some things that were worthwhile to some of them.
Wow.
And actually, Steve, when I first saw your article idea, I was kind of like, well, that's sort of an interesting concept. But the more I thought about it, I was like, it actually kind of makes sense because a lot of there actually is both Serling and Gibson really like twist endings. They both had that in common. Serling was a little more willing to get into the weird and into the more fantastical than Gibson usually was, but they both really love that idea of the ending twist that kind of changes the story. So it was actually a better match than I think a lot of people would have expected.
And David Avallone takes that and adds to it and works on it, where there's each of the 4 issues ended with kind of a twist in a sense, or a surprise.
Yeah. Guys, I can't thank you enough for coming on to share this with us and talk with us. Definitely, for those who have been following this whole thing, I would definitely back this if you're curious, about these great many articles from these talented writers and some of this great artwork. I would back this today if I were you. All right, because you don't want to miss out on this, especially if you're coming into the Shadow Realm or the Shadowed Circle. Yeah, because this is just great stuff. It really brings home, our love for this character, and everyone's got their own thoughts and feelings about certain aspects, or just like you just said, how did he fund his agents? Yeah. So I think it's thanks to these guys and fans like all of you. This is why the Shadow is still relevant and still beloved after 95 years.
Mm.
Yeah.
Well,
So check out the Shadowed Circle.
thank you, Ian, for having us and for helping to keep the shadow in front of people.
I will always do that. And yeah. Unfortunately, folks, I'm not going to say the weed crime bears bitter fruit. I'm not going to do that. I don't have that type of voice. I don't. But who knows? The Shadow does. The Shadow knows. Well, folks, I'm Ian Miller, and this has been Trevor Threat Comics YouTube channel. Have yourselves a great night.